2nd, 2017 to order. Clerk Hefner, could you call the roll?
Mayor Beckman?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Brinkman?
Here.
Councilmember Cernanek?
Present.
Councilmember Clark?
Here.
Councilmember Cole?
Here.
Councilmember Hopping?
Here.
And Councilmember Valdez.
Present. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Move me one way or the other.
We have an agenda that's been posted and presented to City Council. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda? That brings us to agenda item 4, which is public comment. Public comment is an opportunity for anyone to express opinions or ask questions that are not part of the public hearings. Tonight we do have one public hearing. An immediate response should not be expected. We ask that anyone who would like to speak during public comment, please sign in on the green sheets, the comment sheets that are located on the table in the back of the room. It helps us manage the meeting when we know how many speakers we're going to have. We expect comments to be civil. Disrespectful behavior will not be tolerated. There is a 3-minute time limit. And we have a couple people who've signed up. Kyle Schlachter. Good evening.
Good evening, Council. Kyle Schlachter, District 2. I just wanted to come speak to you guys today because I was watching the study session last week, and I see that it made it onto the agenda to be talked about today, and it has to do with the city manager position. And I want to start off by saying I actually agree with Councilmember Clark that I think Mr. Ralph would be a great city manager. I think he's shown to have the qualities and the qualifications. But something gave me great pause and concern about this this whole process, kind of going around the application process. As far as I know, and I don't know if it got resolved at the workshop last Friday. I know Mr. Ralph said he was going to bring up his issues and concerns at the workshop. I don't know about any of that. But this kind of antics and stunts of circumventing the public's kind of will on you guys to select a city manager concerns me. And I don't know if I, as a public resident, feel comfortable with having a city manager just be appointed. This speaks to the trust of all the residents and the trust of any future applicants of any job in the city. Why would anyone apply to work in Littleton if the process just can be circumvented? And I don't know, and I don't want to criticize Mr. Ralph, but for someone that isn't willing to go through a competitive process to get a job, what does that say about what he's going to do for Littleton? Is he not going to stick his neck out for Littleton and for the residents? So I would love to see him as a candidate, but brought into the pool. And I don't know what the other candidates are. I haven't seen their qualifications. Only you guys have. So I just I hope you guys make the right decision and think thoughtfully about this decision later on tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Thank you. Don Bruns.
Don Bruns, District 4. Good evening, Council. Mayor Beckman and other council members presented excellent rationale for selecting Mark Ralph as our new city manager at your April 25th study session. It was so solid and well-reasoned, at least some of it bears repeating here. He demonstrates professional integrity, has a good understanding of city manager and council roles, follows best practices, providing quality information to city staff, is comfortable and able to work with citizens having differing views, is experienced in regional operations with other entities beyond the city, knows who the players are, and recognizes problems we face, exhibits exemplary conduct with council and even-handed treatment of all, has a welcome measure of humility and a willingness to admit mistakes, is approaching a year of grounding experience as acting city manager, and fits council's candidate profile. A central question for many of us has been how to convince municipal officials, that is council and its boards and commissions, to value what Littleton already has rather than what others want us to become, especially outsiders who see us primarily as just a place to build. As one of my former colleagues said, "Wow, you chose a great place to live." Littleton has a wonderful suburban landscape, lots of tree-lined streets, its own distinctive architecture, and the look and feel of an authentic small-town neighborhood culture. Taking care of what we already have means resisting alluring attempts to change our uniqueness, what we really are. It also means valuing our distinctive character qualities so that we maintain that which sets us apart from the featureless urbanization crowding in. Hints made at your last study session that Mr. Ralph's public works background might not be optimal for city management were troubling. Isn't stewardship of what we already have precisely what is needed to avoid taking our eyes off the sustainability target? In the past year, as acting city manager, Mark Ralph's leadership skills have been made obvious even just to plain citizens like myself. Indeed, he seems to be committed to move forward in restoring citizen confidence in our city's administration, and this is so very welcome. Clearly, he not only places a premium on listening to citizens to find out what they value, but he knows how to do it. Unless we follow through with such a commitment, ensuring a sustainable future for the city that brought us here in the first place will be impossible. I hope that council majority will act in the best interests of Littleton citizens, believing that confirmation of Mr. Ralph as our new city manager will move us in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. Our next speaker is Pam Chadbourne.
Good evening, Council. My name is Pam Chadbourne. I live a block and a half from here in District 1. I agree with the first speaker, Kyle. What Council did at the study session on Tuesday, I found appalling. And I grew up here, and I'm pretty old. So please observe that. Making an end run around the process is important. We learn from deliberation and from considering other candidates. Whether we pick those candidates or not in the end is irrelevant to the fact that the process has been conducted. We've heard them. We asked them to spend their time on applying. They did. We got consideration of and picked out some of the top ones. We could have, all of us, heard what their qualifications were and what they had to offer, and we would have learned from that, whether we picked them or not. We also would have benefited from the process, just talking to each other and deliberating. This outcome focus that we've got to seize the right city manager. Are you okay, Councilmember Cole? Thank you. I just want to make sure. We learn from the process. We learn from each other in our talking to each other. And by cutting that out, you have damaged us, or at least you will if you vote for this ID thing tonight. I'm appalled at how it's being handled. So please don't vote for this, and go see if we can get some of these candidates back and interview them and consider them together, talk about their qualifications, and then make a choice. And if interim city manager Ralph wins at the end, great. He's got huge authority then. And if a different candidate is selected, that would be for compelling reasons that are good for the city. It is not good for the city to do this process, and it may result in not having a city manager that might be the best. So, council, please do not do this to us tonight. Also, I want to mention the Planning Commission deliberations last week. We had a new alternate member who spoke and brought up things that the staff did not in their presentation about compliance, with our downtown standards and guidelines for a non-conforming project asking for waivers on Curtis Street, which is near to my house. And rather than dealing with what she brought up, it was ignored, and the commission voted for this. Council, in the past, you've looked at the board members, and I think there's a problem with staff presentation here too. So let me mention that as a concern with management and with our
you,
board. Thank you.
That completes the list of people that I have signed up. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Please. Good evening.
I'm Carol Fay, District 3. I would like to speak in favor of considering Mark Relf as the city manager. We've already had the lengthy process of interviewing candidates, and Mark was excluded from that candidacy because of a misunderstanding of his residency in Littleton being a requirement. If it weren't for that, I'm quite sure that he would have been considered as a candidate with the first group. And so the fact that he is included in the first group a little later, after the first group has been discarded, seems like in a way it follows a process. So I can see a way of considering him at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? I don't see anyone. Thank you. This brings us to agenda item 5, which is consent agenda items. There are 3 items on the consent agenda. The consent agenda items can be adopted in a single motion. All ordinances must be read by title prior to voting on the motion. Any consent agenda item may be removed at the request of a council member. Resolution, or agenda item A, is Resolution 05-2017. This is a resolution to approve a memorandum of understanding between the State of Colorado Governor's Office of Information Technology Communication Services and the City of Littleton for sharing communication resources. Agenda item B is ID 17-132. This is a motion to approve the cancellation of the June 20th, 2017 and July 4th, 2017 regular council meetings. Agenda item C is ID 17-118. It's approval of the April 18th, 2017 regular meeting minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I move approval of consent agenda items 5A, 5B, and 5C.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Are you ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Was that Bill that seconded?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for being here.
That was well spoken.
This brings us to agenda item 6, which is ordinances for first reading. We'll have several items. Two items, agenda items A and B. Both of these have been discussed in some level at a previous staff meeting, and per the procedure that we're following now, we're trying to get staff study on issues that are coming up for first reading that are somewhat complex so that we can talk about them in a roundtable situation and in a presentation. First one is agenda item A, ordinance 13-2017. It's an ordinance on first reading to amend Title 11 subdivision requirements. We have staff prepared to present additional information if council would like. Does council have any questions of the staff member?
I'll move to approve on first reading ordinance 13, series 2017, to amend Title 11 subdivision regulations.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there additional discussion?
Yeah, what's the date that we're setting on that?
Good question.
Good
I
question.
think it's June 6th. Or
Next regular.
Oh, May
16th of
16th.
May.
16th of May.
To bring back to public hearing, second reading, public hearing, May 16, 2017.
Second.
Still second.
Oh, third.
Completed.
So we have a motion and a second, just on the corrected with the date that it's returning. Is there any discussion? Are you ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Agenda item B is ordinance 09-2017. This is an ordinance on first reading to amend the city's zoning code, Title 10, with respect to commercial mobile radio service and to expand the city's regulations to include wireless communications facilities. We had a presentation from our city attorney on this matter in a study session prior to this. Are there any requests for additional staff information?
In that case, I'll move to approve on first reading ordinance 9-2017, amending the city zoning code Title 10 with respect to commercial mobile radio service and to expand the city's regulation to include wireless communication facilities and set the second reading for May 16th.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there additional discussion?
So I do have a question. I thought we had a communication today that suggested there was quite a bit of feedback on this, and
No pun intended.
sorry, and maybe to get all these comments and bring, maybe synthesize. Am I inventing something? Okay, I made that up, sorry.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry. I'm not aware of any
Okay.
considerable
So
feedback,
if we
sorry.
have significant feedback, should we give that to you? Spelling errors, grammar errors, and a couple of substantive things?
On those kind of things, just so the council knows, I had a conversation with Councilmember Cole today, and I know she's identified a number of questions about grammar issues and spelling issues, and I have offered to get together with her between first and second reading, and any of those that we find we'll fix before second reading. For any substantive issues, I'm not sure what you're referring to about a lot of feedback. If council members have questions, certainly you can call anybody on the staff at any time about it. If you hear of members of the public who have feedback about this, I would encourage their attendance at the public hearing, and I think either Jocelyn and or I would be happy to get together and speak with them prior to the public hearing as well.
Okay.
Also, if there's anything that comes up, in this, that is part of that substantive elements, can that dialogue be included, or how those issues are addressed as part of the package with second reading?
Sure. Any changes that we make, whether they're form or grammatical changes or anything substantive, you'll have a council communication from staff before second reading to identify it.
Thank you.
Any additional discussion? Seeing none, are you ready to vote? We have a motion and a second.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
This brings us to agenda item 7, which is ordinances for second reading and public hearing. We have one ordinance that we have to have as a public hearing and as a second reading, and that is agenda item A, ordinance 08-2017. It's an ordinance on second reading to approve the Canon Financial Services Master Lease Agreement. We've had a discussion previously from our Finance Director, Tiffany Hooten. Are there any additional questions for her now, and then I'll open a public hearing? Don't have any questions at this time. I have no one who's signed up. I'd like to open the public hearing at 6:50. I have no one who has signed up for it. Is there anyone in the room who would like to speak to this issue? With that, I'll close the public hearing at 6:50 in a few seconds further. Now it's time for either a motion and a second, or if we'd like to have some additional discussion prior to the motion.
I'll move to approve the ordinance on second reading, approve a master lease agreement with Cannon Financial Services, Inc.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
I'm sorry, who seconded?
Jerry.
Jerry.
Mr. Valdez.
That'll be quick.
Not hearing any need for any discussion. Are you ready to vote? Sure.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
This brings us to general business, which is agenda item 8. We have one item, which is agenda item A. It's ID 17-137. It's a follow-up to the study session that we had last week. We've placed on the agenda under general business a motion to negotiate a contract for city manager with Mark Ralph. I want to, before a motion and a second, do we have any discussion? Do I have a motion?
I move that we select Mark Ralph as our sole finalist and instruct Waters and Company to negotiate a contract with him for the city manager's position.
Second.
Within a motion and a second, discussion, if any?
We've had Mark for the acting city manager for approximately 10 months now. I personally think that he's doing a very good job. While we have a list of experienced candidates, I think that Mr. Ralph's attributes and skills would make him the best selection. And so I think this is the right thing to do for the city of Littleton.
Additional discussion? Councilmember Cernanek.
Mr. Chairman, I move to table this motion until June 6th or a later date after the city manager candidate interviews.
Second.
We now have a motion and a second to table this matter to June 6th. Any discussion? Bill?
Yes, over the weekend I had an opportunity to view last week's study session, and as you and the acting city manager are aware, I did provide information that I would not be there last week. Relative to this motion, the process that we had agreed upon included interviews by 3 panels, the council, citizens or boards and commissions, and directors. I did not anticipate Kyle's comments or Pam's comments this evening, but this year in earlier candidate selection processes that we've been involved in, these panels separately interviewed candidates for both city manager and the city attorney. The panels appreciated being involved, and we, the council, learned from the input provided by these panels, and the panel input did actually influence our decisions. To scrap the process, as Kyle and Pam indicated earlier, is wrong. If Mark Ralph would like to be considered, he can make that choice to be included or not. Reacting to some of the comments at the study session and shared tonight, understand, Doug, you have a personal opinion about Mark's performance. Based on comments last week and my own personal discussion with Mark, that may not be universal. My observation is that in talking with Mark over time, he was not interested in the job. He suggested that he would be the biggest cheerleader for anyone that would take the position. If interested, he wanted to go through the entire process and would only take the position if there was a unanimous vote. He asked to be considered in the second round. From my own personal perspective, I had a discussion with Mark touching on some performance items. The next information that I received is he wanted to withdraw his name from consideration. Now he's indicated that he would like to be considered, but only if he bypasses the selection process. I find this, as Kyle and Pam have mentioned, personally deeply disturbing. If he can believe that he is more than a caretaker, so be it. Let's go through the process. Let's have the opportunity to listen to citizens and listen to the directors, and we may learn something that we're not aware of at this point in time. None of my comments take away from his technical understanding and his ability to do public works. And if need be, I can go on and make additional comments, but I believe those would be sufficient and would urge folks to say, hey, let's follow the process that we agreed upon. And let's be true to Littleton in this and involve the panels and have the open house as well, where folks that would like the opportunity have an opportunity to meet any of the candidates and comment.
Additional discussion. Councilmember Hopping.
Well, I agree that we've set a process, and I think Mark has done a fine job in the interim, and it's time for us to move to a permanent city manager, but we have a process in place, and we've talked about that for a year. We wrote a check, I assume it's been written, to Waters and Company for $40,000 to round up candidates, and it's I would consider that money down the drain if we settle on an internal candidate. And as I think Ms. Chadbourne said, if we go through the process and decide on Mark, who I think is an outstanding individual, if we do that and settle on Mark, that's great. But this is what do we have, in excess of a $50 million budget affecting 45,000 plus people, and to not consider other candidates, I think, is a dereliction of duty on our part. We do have a very complex city, and Mark has been an outstanding public works director and an outstanding interim manager, but some of the candidates we have designations that city managers earn over a long period of time. They have worked with cities this size. They've worked with complex situations involving issues that we may be facing down the line with, because you don't ever know if they're going to come in with public-private partnerships, community development, family and family issues that demand somebody who can reach into the resources that are available to experienced city managers. A lot of those people have had these jobs for 15 plus years. So it really demands thorough consideration. I agree with Councilman Cernanek that Mark's in and out here I know he's had some issues trying to decide. It's been a little bit of ambivalences along the way. I've talked to Mark personally about this. I've always had very productive conversations, but I think for the sake of the city's process, the respect of our citizens, and the process that we ourselves elected to go through, we need to follow through with the process. If Mark wants to be a candidate, I encourage him to apply, but I think we need to look at alternatives as well.
Additional discussion, please.
Well, according to our protocols, when I agree with what others have said, I'll simply say I agree with what you said and not repeat it. But I agree with what both Phil and Bill have said, and the logic behind it, and the comments about process. And I would remind council that we did this once before with a city attorney, and that was, we broke that process, and we heard from the community about the violation of process there. Process is really whatever we decide it to be, but I think the public has an expectation at this point that we're going to at least be more inclusive than what's currently on the table. So I support moving this to June 6th. We have everything scheduled and can safely move this motion to June 6th and deal with it at that point when we have the other interviews and other candidates considered.
Councilmember Clark.
We've already paid Waters and Company. We paid them for the first city manager search. We're not paying them any additional for the second city manager search. The amount that was paid is a sunk cost. This, Mark is actually, as acting city manager, is the fourth city manager that I've served with. 3 of them were promoted from within and had no previous city manager experience. I think that, Mark would be the 4th one. I think that he will do an excellent job. I don't consider it to be settling. I want him. I want him because I think that he will be a good fit with Littleton. I think he will help the council function well. I think he will help calm the discord that's happening between the citizens. Just the fact that he's willing to actually listen to different citizen groups rather than instructing council people not to go to some groups' meetings is a plus. It's not unusual in my experience. As I said, this is my 3rd city manager selection process. It's not unusual for candidates to want a 7-0 vote. It is highly unusual to get 7-0 votes. And there have been very successful city managers that have come on board on 4-3 votes, some of them with our neighboring cities. So I don't see the point, if we have the person that can do the job, that's highly qualified, I think that we should go and get them. And I think that is the case here. I consider Mark to be the best of the candidates that we looked at in the first group and the best of the candidates that were submitted to us in the second group. Lengthening the process, having the people fly out here, interview us when we already know who the best candidate is, I think is unfair to them, unfair to the citizens, and unfair to the process. So I recommend that we vote against the motion to table this and move forward.
If we're going to go a second time, we'll go for a second time for everyone. So. Comments?
Well, I do have a question about the motion.
Question?
I'm not understanding the tabling, because on June 6th, if in the meantime we've interviewed people and so forth, and if I were to be surprised and the person were not Mark, we'd be making a motion to appoint somebody else, I think. So if I could get some kind of comment from the city attorney about the appropriateness of this particular motion.
Well, there's an initial motion to move forward with negotiating a contract with the acting city manager. And if it is tabled, it will be brought up again on, what was it, June 6th? June 6th. At that point, if council has done interviews and decides it wants to extend an offer to someone else, then that motion will be denied or postponed indefinitely, and you can move forward making a motion to proceed with whatever other candidate you would like to go forward with.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted that clarity.
Additional comments? I'm trying to get each council member at least once.
Thank you.
Interested before we go the second time.
I do believe in promoting from within when we have a good candidate, and I do believe Mark Ralph, as the acting director, has been done an exceptional job in a position that he's been in almost for a year now. He knows the city well. We have some big stuff coming up here in the very near future. I do believe Mark is the best person for this position as we went through the information. I think interviewing wouldn't do a whole lot for me at this point. For me, it's just time to move on, and I'm not surprised that some want to drag this process out a little bit longer. I support Mark Ralph, and I understand that he did move in and move out of this process. He had some family issues. He's had some other issues regarding a misunderstanding by all of us that the candidate had to live within the city. We now know that that's not the case. I'm in favor of Mark.
Okay, if we want to go for second comments, Councilmember Hopping.
Okay, first of all, several people have said Mark has the best skills, and we don't know that because we haven't even interviewed other people. I haven't even seen a resume from Mark. I'm sure he has one because he applied for Public Works, but I think it'd be nice maybe for the city manager's job if we could see a resume before we make a decision. At the study session last week, I reviewed some of the candidates, and I'm not going to belabor that. I'm just going to review one. For comparison purposes, a designated city manager, the ICMA designation, has a BA and a master's in public administration, graduate at Harvard's Kennedy School Senior Executive Program, and the 2016 New Mexico City Manager of the Year. I mean, these are heavy qualifications, and Littleton does have stuff coming up. I think Mark is, one way or another, going to be an integral part of that, and I look forward to his input, but I hate to see us pass by the opportunity to consider other people who might be the best players in the best positions to do this. And like I alluded before, it's like having John Elway play defensive tackle. Doesn't always make a lot of sense to put people out of position.
Anyone like to speak again?
Well,
Becky?
I'm thinking of a couple of presidents in the history of this country who didn't have anywhere near the background education of others, who turned out to be some of the best presidents this country's ever had. I think when you've seen someone for 10 months, you get, if you're really looking, you get good insight into their abilities, even if they haven't used them to the max yet. I don't think we will find anybody better than Mark, and that's not to imply that I'm settling on Mark. I just think he's proven himself. He can work toward certain credentials if that's what people want, but the man is doing a good job. A very good job under some challenging circumstances. So I'm supporting, at this point, I'm supporting Mark, so.
No comment, Phil?
Yes, Councilmember Clark mentioned we know. I'm not sure who is the we that is represented in that comment. We've not yet heard from a citizen panel. We've not yet heard from directors. And our process is such that we thoughtfully put that together so that we would be able to get buy-in, or at least information from all of the panels. And the we, if it's a royal we, and Doug is talking about himself, that might be appropriate, but I'm not sure that we know, looking at the city of Littleton, inclusive of citizen and director panels, actually know that. I agree that Mark has been doing a great job as caretaker for the position, but I would hope we're looking for more than a caretaker and believe that he's deserving of the right to ask panels questions as well, and depriving him of that dialogue, I think is a wrong thing. So we ought to follow the process. And so I would ask for support of the motion. It is not saying that Mark may not be the best candidate. What it does is it says, let's follow the process, or at least allow ourselves the time to follow the process.
Councilmember Brinkman.
I find this very disturbing. When it's appropriate, or when it's convenient for there to be a quick decision without following the process, then the motions get made and their support. When it's not convenient, then battle lines are drawn and all things get changed. So I think it's quite hypocritical that we're even talking about violating a public process, violating an interview process, simply because there's a drive to hire one particular person. Again, I think it's a tough start for someone who hasn't had an opportunity to be interviewed, who hasn't had an opportunity to, while he may be doing the job as an acting city manager, there are many more facets to being a city manager, and Mark has not been able to engage in many of those because as acting, though he's not chosen to do those as waiting for a new city manager, including the hirings. And I think that many of the things that everyone has said about Mark and his capabilities, I agree with, and I like Mark. I do not agree that at this point, in my opinion, that Mark is the best choice for city manager, partially because I don't know that yet. We have candidates that had great backgrounds and experience that met the criteria that we had listed. And I also have concerns with some things over the 10 months working with Mark on various issues and various things. And so this is not a walk away for me. This is not deal's done, we've got to do it, let's make it happen, do it tonight. And I think it's really, really unfair of council to step outside of the process to get something done when they know that there are 3 other council members up here who are also responsible to that position as appointees of that position, and there's not going to be offered the opportunity for there to be a process followed. That's all that's being asked for tonight. Whether Mark comes out at the end being city manager or not isn't even my issue at this point. It's that the process it doesn't exist. The new process is if someone wants it and they can figure out how to get around the system and get around the processes and get the votes of support, then that's where we sit. I will support Phil's motion this evening.
Additional comments from any other council members for the second time? So we have before us a motion, and the motion has been seconded to table. I want to get the correct wording from the city clerk if I could.
Councilmember Cernanik moved and Mayor Pro Tem Brinkman seconded to table item 8A until June 6th, until after interviews for city manager take place.
We have a motion and a second. We've had discussions. Ready to vote?
One question.
Question?
The interviews are what date again? I don't have my calendar in front of me.
June 6th.
May 18th
No.
and 19th.
Oh, no, I'm
There's
sorry,
this
Chair.
May.
I have a calendar.
The 18th, right? The 18th. They're May 18th.
So in our next regular meeting is?
The 16th. So that's why this would come back on June 6th.
Thank you.
Ready to vote?
The vote is 3 in favor, with Councilmember Cole voting no. Council members Clark, Cole, Mayor Beckman, and Councilmember Valdez voting no. The motion fails 3-4.
This brings us back to the original motion, which has been seconded. Additional discussion. Not hearing any additional discussion. So we have a motion made by Councilmember Clark. And can the clerk repeat that motion?
Yes, sir. Councilmember Clark moved and Councilmember Cole seconded to approve Mark Ralph as the sole finalist and charge Waters and Company to negotiate with Mark Ralph.
For contract.
For
A contract.
a what?
Contract.
Sorry. I couldn't hear you.
Okay, a motion and a second. A yes vote is to forward this motion forward with the action to do a contract. A no vote is to not do that action.
The vote is 4 in favor, with Council members or Mayor Pro Tem Brinkman and Councilmembers Cernanik and Hopping voting no. The motion carries 4-3.
This brings us to agenda item 9, comments and reports. City Manager.
Council, today is my birthday, by the way.
You're kidding.
Yeah, I'm 60 years old. I guarantee you I will not forget this day. You know, I appreciate the differences of opinion about how to approach this, and I know that council sincerely will believe this, but I never intended to create this kind of situation. I certainly have discussed with you some of my reasons behind that, so it's clear. I think you do have a clear understanding of where I've come from over time. And so I appreciate the support that you have given me. You know, as the acting, each one of you have been great. And I realize that the role going from acting to the permanent city manager is a much more of a significant step. Believe me, I appreciate what that means. On the other hand, I want this job. I hope that nobody would question my dedication to this organization and my intent to do everything in my power to be successful, not in the position, but for this organization, for the council, and for the community. So at this point, I realize that it's been difficult to get to this point, but at least I wanted to share with you my perspective about how I want to approach this. At some point, you know, I do have some goals specific to how I would like to approach this. It's not appropriate to discuss that now. We'll see how this plays out here in the future. But again, I do appreciate the challenge that every one of you have kind of faced in trying to reach this particular decision, and I do hope that I can bring some level of unity back here with all of council and certainly the community. I do have a couple of other updates that I want to touch on, and it has to do with South Metro and our fire proposal. South Metro is submitting to all of the policymakers here tonight a copy of their proposal for the unification. I have drafted an email for which I'm going to put a little context to that and basically outline what the schedule is going to be and how we might approach this here for the next several weeks. Assuming that I get that email here tonight, I'll certainly share that with council as soon as possible. We do have a process in place. We have selected a consultant to help us with that. The Center for Public Safety Management is that consultant. They are charged with taking this proposal and over the next 30 days making a review of that. We have followed some of the recommendations. We do have an executive committee that's been assembled here, basically our fire partners, plus the deputy city manager, HR, and finance director. And so you'll see a little bit more detail about that here in the coming weeks. Working with our fire chief and Mike Bratton, our deputy city manager, I have asked our consultant for 2 other proposals, basically to position ourselves so if the council and our partners, quite honestly to some extent, if we're interested in taking kind of a different look at different alternatives, at least we have something ready there that the council and others can look at. Again, we are still kind of working through the details of that. The fire partners have a meeting on May 12th. We're going to be talking about some of those additional proposals, and eventually I'll be reporting back to council on what that could mean. I also want to talk about the fire dispatch issue. Over the past several weeks, we've been working with our consultant trying to understand what concerns they may have about the timing of when dispatch may be considered here on a contract basis with South Metro. We do have a meeting here this week. It was originally today, but being set here for Thursday to kind of analyze the details of that. If staff and the consultant were able to kind of reconcile some of these issues, I'm hoping that we can bring this to council here in the very near term. And specifically, we have a request from one of our partners here to have the council consider this at our earliest convenience. Again, if we can work out some of those issues, we could see that as early as May 9th, next week. I will know more details here after Thursday. But those are a couple of very significant updates here that I wanted to brief council. And probably the most significant is that the proposal is going to be distributed here this evening.
Anything additional? Let's start with the city council members.
Wait a second, I have a question.
Questions, go ahead.
Question, Mark, with regard the proposal from South Metro at this point in time, is there a time date on when a response is needed by?
At this point in time, the partners really haven't kind of discussed that particular part of it. We have agreed that our consultant, through contract, is going to take 30 days to review the proposal. And so we're, again, on May 12th, the part of the purpose of that meeting is to allow the executive committee, the partners here, to make a cursory review, meet with our consultant, and kind of lay out some maybe preliminary issues and questions so they have a little bit better perspective on how they might approach that. But basically, 30 days from today, our consultant really should be in a position to share their findings.
But the proposal from South Metro doesn't have, we need to respond by a particular date.
I don't know at this point. I have not seen it, but it's a great question. I just don't know the answer.
Okay, thank you.
Somebody had questions?
I haven't seen a proposal specific to the communication center. I don't know if the consultants have seen one. I think that if we're going to consider the communication center as a separate action, that the consultants should have a chance to look at that proposal, and we should have a chance to look at that proposal. I mean, we've had a lot of view graphs and hand waving, but we've actually never seen anything in writing specific to what the details are. So I would think that May 9th might be pushing it for.
And that's a great question. That's what we've been working towards. We do have a draft intergovernmental agreement with South Metro for those services. We have shared that with our consultant. In part, that's kind of the purpose of the meeting this week. Again, if the issues are easily addressed, then perhaps May 9th may work. If it's something much more involved, then we have to perhaps look at a different date. But the intent is truly to get before the council here a draft of the contract.
Okay.
Additional comments on the fire issues? If I could just make a comment that it's been really clear in the discussions that we've had as a council that we feel concerned when we don't have the information, and we've said it at several times, and I know you've struggled with getting the information too. The issue has been, this is South Metro's proposal, and yet we have nothing from South Metro up until today. We never saw numbers, we never saw a business plan, we never saw a transition, we never saw commitments to what services would be provided and what the penalties would be if those services were not, and all the things that we're familiar with that would be in that kind of agreement and that switchover, and we just haven't seen any of it because South Metro hasn't provided it. And so we have received qualitative kinds of comments about why this would seem to make sense in some people's eyes, but I also had some comments from the community of, what's this all about? Show us how this works. And we, we aren't there, so I understand that issue. And I just wanted to point out that council is aware of that, and that is our requirement. And that would include an outreach to the public at some point when we have something, we actually know what it is, and we can talk about it. We can see if the public has an interest in Plan A or Plan B, whatever those are. So.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if I may just comment on that as well. We obviously have had some discussion over the last several months about that, but without seeing a very specific proposal, it's kind of hard to understand, the details of it, obviously. So even after our consultant makes the 30-day review, this is really the beginning of the process. I'm sure that we're going to have all sorts of issues that we'll identify that we'll have to work through, certainly as from a city perspective, as well as the individual partners that we have. So I'm not sure what the timeline will be. I think that's why we're going through this process with this consultant. I do have, in my opinion, kind of a high degree of confidence in our consultant. And we'll have to see what their findings are here in roughly a month and then decide what the next steps are. In part, that's why I've asked for these additional proposals, and depending on what the outcome of that might be.
And it's also worth pointing out that the consultants have met with council members, and each council member had a chance to talk about what our concerns were. And they took pretty good notes, I think, on those. And there may be a point here where individual council members, after we see this and we have something to work with, we may want to do individual meetings with them again, just to ask those face-to-face questions with them.
And the public process too, if I may, Mr. Mayor, I think that is something I think we're all keenly aware of. And we don't have an answer to that yet. I think it's going to take another, again, 30 days to understand what we've got before we decide what are the next steps. But public process, I'm sure, is in the back of everybody's mind about what to do with this.
And if I could add on to that, when we talked to the consultants, we did ask them about that, and they said that that's part of their plan. They have a very rigorous public process, but they were also cautious to remind us that you want to make sure that what you're putting in front of the public is a lot more polished and finely tuned than what we're going to be processing through over the next probably could be 3, 4, 5 months. So I think that our internal digestion of this, depending on where that ends up, then if it does end up in a public process, these guys have the skill set and they've got the experience in having done it. So I feel comfortable with that.
Yeah, we could do this at a district meeting, say.
Councilmember Cernanek.
Yes, Mark, I'd love to see us integrate Bleicher into this approach so that indeed we are taking a look at all stakeholders and their varied perspectives on this. And I think it would behoove us to follow through with that.
Agreed. If there was ever an issue that deserves this kind of attention, this is it.
And if I can, Mayor, I was going to save this for my reports, but since we're on fire, I'll just add it in. As liaison, I am working with the elected liaisons from both of our partners and from the South Metro Board and from the Cunningham Board, and we are meeting. We've met twice. One was just to kind of say hi, nothing was really dealt with, and then we met again to kind of discuss where each of our camps were and what process each of us have already gone through. And we're going to be meeting Friday, and what we will be discussing at that meeting is we'll be having a conversation about governance, because what I don't think you're going to see in the report coming from South Metro is anything that would encompass any sort of governance look. And so the plan is that those that we're kind of, as the 5 of us there that are all the electeds representing electeds, that we will be hashing out some of the information on the governance. I will be bringing that back to you guys. They will be bringing it back to their boards. We'll hash through that. We'll go back in and hash it back through again. It's a simpler process, we thought, that involving the chiefs and a whole bunch of other people. We figured that the best way to work through the governance would be those who really are the electeds in charge of handling that. And so what does that look like? We're also looking at working with, and we're looking at different attorneys at this point to help guide us through some of those pratfalls that lay await for this type of trying to design something, whatever that would look like, but just to make sure that we're not going to present or look at something that would be, illegal, inappropriate. So I will be keeping you guys up to date on how that's going. Probably if we're meeting Friday, we'll probably maybe make a little bit of time for the study session Tuesday in 15 minutes or so.
Yeah, and I think you had talked about, with all this happening this week, maybe next week's study session, having a dedicated piece to fire, and that we need to, the challenge that we have is the information will begin rolling faster than our meetings allow us to be informed, and we want to stay ahead of it. So I had talked with the city manager today about however we can do this so that we as a council can stay as far ahead of it, the information, as we can, by whatever it takes, and whether it needs to be, written materials or study sessions or whatever. I think this is going to be part of our involvement for the next several months. So, City Manager, did you want to comment on that thought?
Well, I agree. And I think here for the next couple of weeks in particular, I think it's real important to kind of get a lot of these issues communicated to council, because obviously there's going to be a lot of information going around here. Plus the timing of our partners meeting May 12th, I think, is an important milestone. So I think, just need to recognize that once our consultant takes control of this here, then, they'll be the ones communicating more directly with all the partners, all the policymakers.
And just a comment on the consultants for, I'm like many, I trust but verify with consultants. And my impression of the consultants is they are asking the hard questions, and that they're representing the welfare of the citizens of Littleton in my interaction with them with some very hard questions, and that we have to have the answers to these in a way that we can trust and live with for the future years. So I have some confidence in that type of circumstance in helping us. So, okay, let's go to council reports. Let's start with Councilmember Cole.
I have a question of staff. I'm wondering what the status is of the request to bring council a motion to increase the amount of time that citizens can speak to 4 minutes at the beginning of meetings on non-agenda issues.
Can I address that after you do, please? Let me just address it first. I was going through the protocols. I'm not sure that we have to have those stated by number of minutes. I don't think we do that in our protocols or our legislative rules. So and it doesn't appear that we have fixed on a number such as 3 minutes. I think we've done it through just consensus of the group,
okay,
that was something that we could live with, and I think we could change that with another consensus of the group.
Okay, well, I thought there was a request for staff to bring us something, but if we can do it ourselves, I very much want us to change that. And not that we need to decide that right this second.
We do list the agenda process in there, but it didn't have the minutes that I could see. So perhaps.
Mr. Mayor, if I may just add to that. That was an issue that was identified in our retreat, council's retreat here, specifically last Friday. We are scheduled as staff to kind of debrief that here tomorrow. And so I don't have an answer today exactly how to approach that, but we're, as staff, very aware of that as one of your priorities that were identified, if I remember correctly.
And there was just sort of, since most of the people who watch these meetings have no idea what we talked about at our session last week, the retreat. So it was a informational piece. Then Sunday I had the pleasure of helping with the North Littleton Promise Cinco de Mayo celebration. Really delightful. This reaches out particularly to the northeast neighborhood. It was so well attended, we ran out of food. There was a lot of food, and I helped with the serving, but we ran out of food. Certainly with plenty of time left over, but people stayed and sang and danced and just played games, had a delightful time. So it's nice that we have such activities, not just that one, but others that are sponsored by different groups, trying to engage our citizens and build cohesion among people in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Clark.
When the staff takes that up, I'm assuming that they'll all be limited to 3 minutes each, as you're discussing that, right? That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Other than I'll point out that Sunday I don't think was even Uno de Mayo. So
It was Uno, but it was for Sanko, so.
Councilmember Hopping.
A couple of things. First of all, on Peggy, I hear your comment, and I know that the staff is going to outbrief tomorrow, but one of the things we did at the end of the session on Friday was we went all through council. Everybody listed points that they wanted to cover. We had 19 points, and then we went back and said, which ones do we really want to address? And we picked 6. And the one about the increased time for more citizen involvement was not one of them. So I think it's inappropriate to bring it up and try to get it in again unless we want to redo the exercise. I mean, we really put a lot of time and effort into that. And I'm not against citizen involvement by any means, but to go back and pick things off the list that you may not have gotten in that you wanted the first time, I think we need to look at that.
Forgive me, Councilmember, I assumed that was one of the priorities. I'm mistaken. If that's not the case, then so be it. You know, obviously our intent, your direction was for us to focus on those priorities.
Thank you. And I think it is interesting that in the fire discussion, I think it's totally appropriate. We have a lot of public outreach. Not to beat a dead horse, but it seems that if we're going to do that for fire, we should do it for the key hire in this city. A couple other issues. We have had in the past meetings with our board and commissions people in the Littleton schools and all. We haven't had those in a while. I wondered what the process is on that and why we aren't having them, when we will have them. We don't need to have an answer to that right now, but I'd like to have an answer to that in the next couple of weeks. And I don't know if that falls to the mayor or the city manager, but either one. I've had a lot of kickback or comments on sidewalk signs downtown, which was part of the signage redo that was done downtown. And the deal was that when the new signage went into effect, we wouldn't have the sandwich boards anymore. It was pointed out to me by several of the Main Street merchants that the new signage points down side streets and helps them out, doesn't do anything for the people on Main Street. Some of them contend that they can notice a difference in revenues when the sign's out and when it's not. So I just wanted to encourage the merchants who are concerned about this, when we have our downtown public outreach, that be brought up at that point so we can get it talked about.
Concerned about the lack of
They're concerned about the lack of the signs. When they put them out, they feel like they get better business. So, our post office downtown is a mess aesthetically. The paint's peeling, it needs tuck pointing, it's really in bad physical condition. We've tried for quite a while, City Manager Ralph and I tried to work through the post office. We had a cooperative employee who was trying to help us out. We've tried to go through a lot of different channels to get something done. Historic Littleton, Inc. finally got Representative Mike Kaufman to come down about a week ago. And he came to the post office with an aide and an intern and was, in the words of the people who were with him, appalled at the condition of the post office. Took a lot of pictures, wrote a wonderful letter to the Postmaster General that I would not want to have received. But it essentially said, clean it up. It's a wonderful building, and it would be nice if they'd hold up their end of the downtown. I've asked several times for some input on pesticides use in the city, and this is a really good time to bring it up because it's spring. The pests are out, and I mean the garden variety. And we have, through Assistant or Deputy City Manager Broughton, we now have a homeowner's guide to pesticide use that is on the city website. So if you go to the city website and just insert under the search bar pesticides, it tells you how to use them safely. I think it's really important stuff. In part, this is migration season. And in fact, next week is peak bird migration here. And the bees are out and all the critters are starting to go around, and they do ingest pesticides, and it really does affect bee populations and bird populations that eat bees and eat other things that ingest these pesticides. So please take advantage of this. It's outstanding. It's put together by CSU Extension Service, and it's a service to our citizens. That's it.
Councilmember Cernanek.
Yes, thank you. Want to tag on to one item that Councilmember Hopping mentioned. I've mentioned it before, is taking a look at what I consider standard operating procedure is our interface with boards and commissions. That was described in our last review of taking a look at boards and commissions that Councilmember Cole and I participated on. There is only one that is currently on our tentative schedule. We've talked about possibly inviting at least the chairs and co-chairs so that it can be made at a level that has some efficiency, but also, want to be in a position where we're allowing for that, because we have had board chairs come before us and say status quo is not working. So want to underline that Councilmember Hopping brought up. Also, for those of you, and I understand there are a number of folks that are bikers, meaning the pedaling type of bike that are on council, but also for others that Pedal of Littleton, one of our bike shops, has put out a spring and summer guide to biking, the Front Range and otherwise, and I know that copies are available here at City Center. Copies are also available at the bike shop, and there may be other locations. I want to publicly say thank you to Public Works Director Mark Ralph for his presentation last week. It was good, certainly showed Mark's technical depth with regard to Public Works. We have and do have a number of complex items that are intimate to Public Works, whether we're talking about transportation, whether we're talking about congestion and traffic flow, as well as infrastructure. And my concern, though you were there showing your tremendous technical depth personally, there was no one there assisting you. So I have some big questions with regard succession on that level. Also want to mention last Wednesday, the DRCOG Annual Awards Banquet was held. We have no recognition for any of the City of Littleton projects, but should be one of those items where we take note of, because some of it is relating to innovation and collaboration that occurs in projects around the region. We don't always need to invent a new wheel for some of these items. On April 20th and 21st, attended the Water Now Alliance. I've shared the presentation material with the acting city manager and the who's taking care of some of our water issues, the vice mayor, assistant to the mayor here, and I have shared those. And it was very interesting because some of it was discussion of water rights, collaboration around communities of interest with regard to water, regulation issues with folks there from EPA, agriculture industry, et cetera. And what was a highlight discussion was an award being given for an Arizona project where they have wastewater treatment contained within a semi-trailer that takes it from wastewater to drinking water, and the fact that trying to get folks over the potential yuck factor that might be involved with that is it's being paired with a competition across 32 communities in Arizona, each of them with their own craft brewery, and seeing who can actually get to the point with some beer. And so it's involving some imbibing of some things that some folks don't like, but my wife loves beer, so on that. The Area Agency on Aging grants have been processed through the DRCOG board. These are for the 2 years starting July 1, 2017. A footnote on this is the city has not yet stepped up to be able to qualify for some of these awards, and unfortunately we weren't necessarily in a position where a current recipient of is not going to be able to spend all of their money, and it happens to be with Arapahoe County Senior Mobility Transportation. It's $150,000 that's going to be redistributed to those folks that qualify and have gone through the process to qualify for the grants. And so I will underline at least an interest in getting to the point where we can qualify for some of that, because it is being redistributed to those qualifying applicants. And at the moment, we're not receiving through the county contract with Senior Resource Center the level of support. And yes, we have our own transportation within the city of Littleton, but Senior Resource Center takes care of some of our senior mobility where folks might have a medical office that is outside of the city, and that would be something that Senior Resource Center would be able to address. So I'll underline that. And I feel a need to make a comment and underline this, is that each of us had an opportunity to meet individually with the consultants relative to taking a look at fire. And I'm sure I'm not an exceptional one in this regard, but the issues of transition, performance criteria, as well as monitoring and what are the consequences around that, as well as Councilmember Brinkman mentioned governance, but a heavy part of, I'm sure, every one of our conversations is the public engagement to make sure that whatever decision we're making, folks in the community actually understand it and what are the implications for them and the services they should be expecting from fire and rescue. Thank you.
Councilmember Valdez.
Thank you. Channel 8 is an excellent source to get information about the history of Littleton, the Centennial Racetrack, all kinds of stuff. The post office was on the other night, a brief part, and it's historic designation, isn't it?
It's national, it's recognized nationally, but not locally designated.
It was built in 1930, so it's been around a while, that's for sure. And I did hear today that the Inglewood post office on Broadway may be going away. But Channel 8, though, I did want to mention, though, besides having the excellent history about Littleton and other things, one of the informational things they had the other night when I was watching was what to do when you come across the coyote with you and perhaps your dog. And it's worth watching. I encourage people to go on. It's on Channel 8 cable. It's also, you can get it through the internet. There's a lot of good shows on there to watch, but it was excellent to see what to do when you come across a coyote. But I didn't realize the post office was 1930. Yeah, so maybe it is looking a little rough.
It is a little rough.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Brinkman.
No report.
You already did.
Thank you. And she already gave her report on fire, which is going to be significant activity. I do want to comment on the retreat that we had last Friday. It was interesting. We had a person who was facilitating for us. He had done interviews and talked with staff and council and a number of people ahead of time to try to bring to us something that seemed to cross all barriers and cross all lines. And the issue that we ended up spending a lot of time on was getting community input and how we would do that, given technology changes and other kinds of things. Thought it was very interesting. Everyone participated, I think, pretty enthusiastically, and I thought it was a great retreat. So I thank you for putting that together, Mark, and it was great. I think a great choice for a facilitator, and he allowed us to do what we need to do, which I think is the mark of a good facilitator. So thank you. I don't have anything additional. We are adjourned.
Just one item reminder of